the developing of the bebop sound and the vocabulary. It's a very interesting subject to me, as a matter of fact, especially the vocabulary. And I'm going to partly talk to you guys and talk to the band too, because I unfortunately don't see those guys as often as I'd like to, and today we're going to have a great time communicating with each other in a common musical language. And I think that causes musicians to seek each other out. Because if you play with somebody that plays a different musical language, it can be very difficult, it can be not fun, or it can be strange and uncomfortable. I think that, what can I liken it to? I can liken it to if instead of calling it French and English, you called it English bebop, and you called it the French language swing music. I speak swing music, you know, Benny Goodman would say that, and Charlie Parker would say, I speak bebop. And if the swing-speaking musician would say, or rather if the bebop musician would say, bear with me guys, if the bebop musician would say something like, yeah man, I put the pencil on the table, then the swing era musician might say something like this. He might say something, say mister, on the table it is the pencil I put. Same thing kind of, you know, but really makes you feel like because he's saying something. He's using words and vowels and consonants, and as we are using the 12 notes of the 12-tone scale to make up our music, but the way it's put together can be very foreign. I think that's why the hardcore swing musicians and hardcore Dixieland guys feel so comfortable. They band together because they speak that language well. They enjoy it. Then there are those who get bored and have to move on. And then it becomes difficult. It's a different thing happening. Because you have to, instead of saying, say mister, you have to say, hey man, you know, and you may be hard to say it first. Hi man, I'm hip. You know, it's like, sometimes it doesn't fit right away. Sounds to me, and I mentioned this to you, sounds like Georgie Alden's first adventures of playing bebop tenor. He had a lot of the notes were right and everything, but it was still Georgie from the Benny Goodman swing era, and it didn't quite, Georgie, you know, don't do that.
Because it's not just the notes, it's the time feel too.
Yes,
you know,
true.
A lot of it is the rhythmic feeling that they're playing with.
Yeah, right. And so moving on, to me it's tied up. That's why I mentioned the guy who gets bored. Perfectly natural for a swing era guy like Benny Goodman to never change. Played marvelous, so comfortable, had great fluency, and he did have great time. His time was very similar to Lester Young's time, although their language was close but different. I always felt that, now see, I don't want to get sidetracked and talk about Lester Young as being the real innovator, but to keep it on track, Benny never had to change, never wanted to change. He really believed in his title as the King of Swing. To the disappointment of many musicians in his band. But then there are those who were swing musicians who had to move on. And I'm repeating myself slightly, but if you have anything you'd like to say, please jump in at any moment if you want me to clarify something or if you want to clarify it for me. The difficulty is that the harmony changes. So the swing era harmony was changed in bebop, and my theory, and maybe a lot of other people's theory too, I think the discovery of the flat five and the flat five relationships that was created by Igor Stravinsky were an inspiration to Charlie Parker and a lot of the young beboppers. And I know at the time in the mid-40s, in classical music, great many guys that I knew, and I was quite a young man then, about 15, 16 and 46, and but we listened to Rites of Spring and listened to Petrushka and did a lot of strange things like that, But I say that because, to elaborate a little bit, there's a tale of a bird playing a recording of Stravinsky's Dumbarton Oaks, and the woman who was hanging out with him a lot got so, overused with it that she took the record and threw it out the window. So apparently there's from a word that, from somebody who seemed to know that, and I believe her, that Bird was listening to a lot of classical music. And of course, Bird was a unique guy. I think he was a genius, and he had such musical equipment, and he was such a quick thinker. That's an aspect of jazz musicians. I'm going to depart from the bebop thing for a moment and tell you that jazz music, to me, and you guys are welcome to agree with me or disagree, is in essence, good jazz music is composition. It's a guy composing pretty much instantaneously. And like the classical musician, he's got to have some equipment to enable him to bring out the stuff that's in his mind quickly. So he has to have great control over his instrument, whatever it may be. He has to be a practicer, a guy that can play in any key. And what he's doing is composing. To me, it's playing something and quickly taking the thing you've just played and letting it lead you through another door by inverting it or elongating it or just playing it on a different pitch level, which are all compositional tricks. And therefore, it's quite an interesting thing that's happening. And it seems the quick thinkers, you were just listening to Joe Henderson when we walked in, man, he's just on fire. The things are rolling out. There's enough. The problem classical musicians have with jazz is they feel like it's a waste of material. I've heard that. So that they say, well, there's enough material in the first 8 bars to write a symphony. Well, sure, it's the instantaneous composition has got a lot of pitfalls to it. It's you can't take 2 weeks to write 8 bars or fine tune a little theme or something. You got to do it right away. And but the great thing about the jazz music is that it has a sense of time about it, and the whole thing about, in the vernacular, don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing that Duke Ellington said, is a real truth. And without it, God knows what you'd have. You just have some instantaneous composition that wouldn't be able to compete with the masters at that. Would take time. Somebody jump in with something, and I'll get back to the bebop thing.
Well, I like what you said about playing a phrase and then the next phrase being something that builds on that or contrasts to it. And I would add to that it's also the aspect of thinking on your feet and reacting to what's going on around you at the moment, which could be anything. So depending on who you're playing with, Phil might play something that inspires you to go in a different direction, or the pianist, which we don't have tonight, or Adam, or anyone in the band, your ear might pick up something that just suggests a different direction, and you're free to follow it at any moment. It's that idea of
That's
just
true,
being not locked into anything at any time. So there's a fluidity to what's going on.
And partly the reason that you do try to play with guys you're comfortable with, who are sympathetic to your harmonic views and melodic views, and there's guys that like to play up tempos,
Right.
and other guys are not crazy about that because they can't think fast enough.
And like you were saying about in the swing era, a lot of times those guys would play a solo and then they would just play that same solo every time, whatever was on the record. And you'd hear some of those famous players would play, like on Ellington's band, some of those solos almost became part of the arrangement, where
They did.
They would sort of recreate what was on the recording, and I don't know if that's because people expected that or...
I think there was a commercial thing going on as well as great jazz, and I know that I saw Duke, and he would announce, here's Ray Nance to play his famous solo on Take the A Train.
Right.
And then Ray would come through with his famous solo. that does seem a little strange, doesn't it? I mean, when we all think about jazz as really being improvisation, but it did become part of the tune, and I guess people expected it, and there was a commercial aspect to that. You know, Lee Konitz had something funny that he said on an interview, not something funny, ha-ha. He said, before Lester Young, in the late 30s, jazz music was dance music. And he said, when Lester Young played, it became art. And I know that takes a little swallowing, but I understand it pretty completely because he happened to be one of those great instantaneous composers and extremely gifted at innovation, and he's a perfect guy. And what he does play does seem to be real art, as opposed to the commercial overtones that some of the other tenor players had, who you could tell they were trying to stir up a crowd. They're trying to do something besides make art.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dave, you were around at the, I mean, you know, you're a little older than the rest of us. And you know, when you heard those guys, what you said about people playing the solos, that's kind of like how rock music is now. People expect to hear the same thing. And when the music was really popular like that, right, didn't people used to follow the bands? And there was that song, even when Cootie left the Duke, they followed them like sports teams, right? The way people do with rock and roll now, that, you know, some band changes a lead guitarist, it's really big news because it's so popular. And do you think that when the spotlight was kind of taken off the music, so to speak, that freed them up to not have to?
I mean, isn't that why the Ellington Band went in and did small group recordings without Duke sometimes?
Maybe so.
With Hodges
Sure.
or with Strayhorn?
Because those guys were magnificent improvisers.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not trying to say that they weren't.
No, they're not. They were, yes. I understand.
You know, wasn't there always like somebody from the band like, making their own side record with some guys in the band, and
Sure.
you know, and
Yeah.
without the approval of the leader, if you will,
Or even the public, right? Was that an aspect to it, that, you know, you could do something more for art, say, rather than the general public or commercial?
You guys are all listeners. If there's anything you want to pop in with, please do it. We'll pretend we're all in the living room in a way, you know.
I'd like to ask you about the study process. So these tapes out, you know, the Ambersol tapes and things like that. Where do you put those into a value that's important, or do you think that a lot of people are fooling themselves by playing with those tapes? Or is there one of those volumes that's very good for soloing on, learning how to solo?
Well, I'll reveal something to you. I don't have them.
That's
I
great.
grew up in a different era. It's not. I'm not I'm not going to diss them at all. I didn't have that luxury. I had. You know, gee, I was maybe discovered Charlie Parker in those old '78 records in about 1946, and they wore out really quick too. And they broke if you look sideways at them. You know, it was like crazy. And so they were 3 minutes long, and you got a couple of choruses, and you just had to keep putting that needle on and listening to it, and eventually it became like, and that's the way I learned. I had to listen to stuff that way. Very lo-fi. I got used to lo-fi. So to me, the content meant a lot rather than the sound. The hi-fi was the thing that came in later, and I didn't really have any need to listen to hi-fi, you know.
Did you learn all the solos and everything?
I had to learn them that way, yeah.
Did you learn them in all 12 keys? Did you do that?
No, I never did that, and that's why I don't live in New York today. but there are certain masters that can do that. We talked about that Ray Brown, Al Cohn. I asked Al Cohn what he practiced, you know. He answered very quickly, so he must have had that question before a few times. Al, what is it that you practice? When I practice, I play some of my favorite tunes, and I play them in every key. And I said, and that's tough to do, man. But Lee Konitz talked about key areas, and being familiar with key areas. And he was pretty simplistic about it, but made a lot of sense. He says, do you whistle, do you hum in the car when you're driving, you know, that little melodies? Yeah, sure. Well, in order to play them on your horn, you want to be able to play all the scales and different intervals, and you want to have the facility to be able to bring out what you sing. So he favored to listen to, he wanted to have me learn a couple of Lester Young solos, because he said, you'll know what it feels like to play a great saxophone solo, you know. And he said, but don't just put the needle on, listen to 4 bars, and then take it off. He said, listen to that thing until you can sing it, and then try to play it through your horn. So these are all nice little things to have laid on a person, you know. Now, where are we back?
Well, I'll jump in about the Apersol records.
Yeah, do, because I don't know anything about them.
There's pros and cons to them. I have some of them, and I've used them. I think they can be a great tool. The downside is that when if you're using the same one over and over, the accompaniment never changes. I mean, the same little things happen at the same time. But I guess I look at them as it's like having the rhythm section there that you can practice with. So you can practice tempo. It's like having a metronome. You know, you have to stay in time with the thing. And I don't think that they have to squelch creativity, because I find that when I'm practicing with them, I try to find different things to do. You know, I try not to play the same way all the time with them. But yeah, you could say that they are kind of static, because like I said, the same thing is going to come around in the same place every time, unlike playing with a live rhythm section. But since it's not very practical to have a live rhythm section to practice with all the time in your house, I think they're worthwhile for that. I think they're a useful tool. They can be a useful tool. And he usually gets pretty good rhythm sections to play on them too, so it's like you get to play with, you know, pretty high level.
They're really good for that kid in some village in Vietnam. And I'm being dead serious. If you don't have access to jazz in your area of the world, and you play saxophone or trumpet or guitar or bass or any of the instruments for whatever reason, you know, I've taught a lot of young people that are like, you know, I've never played in a band, I've only just played with my Apersol, but at least they've been able to develop that language that Dave is talking about, and to be able to hear professional musicians do it, and to be able to take, you know, I bet Dave wish he had 2 of those 78s, one with the horn playing and one with not, you know.
Nice, yeah.
When he was that age. So I think that they're a tool that can really, really help people that don't have access to a metro area where they can go hear music, this music being played by professional musicians, and they can't plug into anything else, you know. There's just this book with this CD, and it's got the chord changes. In the back, it's got a chord chart that gives you all the chords written out that we would use in this vocabulary or this language. You know, I didn't know what they were when I was younger. They were around, but I grew up with guys like Phil and Dave and the 2 Daves here. You know, jazz is about playing what you feel. And then I got to college, and everybody's like, oh, you know this tune from this Apersol? And I was like, what's an Apersol? I don't even know what that is, you know. And all of a sudden it's like, here, it's this book of music. And I was like, well, this is cool. The charts are actually halfway right compared to the real books. That's why we used them, because they actually went back and looked at the publishing, and they got the publishing right when the real books weren't published, when they were still handwritten, and you used to have to go to the podium and be like, hey, you got those books downstairs? Wink, wink, wink. You know? So I think they're good for the young person or the old person that might live somewhere like Alaska or Antarctica, or, you know, there are people that live there, and they might actually like jazz. And, you know, I think it's a good tool for them to be able to plug in. And then it makes them kind of go, wait, I got to get somewhere where I can actually play with people, you know. And we've, you know, in jazz education, you know, you see that a lot, actually. Some kid from, you know, Madagascar who had a bunch of Abersols because his dad bought them for him. The kid's killing. Never played with a real band in his life, you know. So it does happen.
Learn the language, yeah.
Yeah, it does happen.
Yeah.
I think they're good for that aspect, you know. For for $12.99, you can get the language.
So, Dave, can you elaborate on the difference between swing and bebop, language-wise? Maybe demonstrate it on the horn a little bit.
I could try. I did. let's see, I must have been started playing the horn late in 1944 when I was turned 14, and I listened to Stan Kenton's band. He had quite a run, man. He was popular then. We used to play him at the junior high dances. All the guys would stand against one wall, all the girls would stand against the other wall. Nobody danced. And
It's the same now.
I changed it. And I remember 1944 in junior high and everything, and June Christie was singing Tampico, Tampico, on the Gulf of Mexico. It was great, you know. So that turned me on. Then I heard Vito Musso playing, and he was the tenor player with Stan Kenton at the time, and he was a swing hot player. Yeah, I like to emulate some of those old guys because I was back there and tried to emulate them in. I used to play some Charlie Ventura tunes. He had a great little band in maybe 1947 with Jackie Kane, Roy Crow. Benny Green was a trombone player. Connie Candoli played trumpet, and at different times he had another alto player who doubled baritone. He had Boots Masuli from the Kenton band, and then he had his brother Ben Ventura, who used to play with him. And Hitman. That because you know the Italian names are tough. You ever notice that? You know, you don't cut in on Vinnie
Boots Masuli's soul.
You know,
Yeah.
you don't get the dance there. Yeah.
But
Jerry Muchacharo.
We called him Boots the Shovel.
But unfortunately, there's other guys, you know, that you do cut in on. Bobby Shapiro, always a good cut in on right away. It's like, but I'm being facetious. I'm kidding around.
Don't do that. This is serious. This is so serious.
It isn't. It isn't. The bebop difference in the bebop thing was the harmonic vocabulary changed, so that, and there were a lot of. No, I didn't really think about it a lot when it was going down there, but. To me, it was just that, geez, Charlie Parker sounds amazing. He's playing such wonderful things that nobody has heard anybody play like that before. And I think it seemed to be a more complex language. The melodies were speeded up, for one thing. The old musicians played melodies that seemed to be easily absorbed by normal, ordinary people that either were non-musicians or musicians. So you had things like, if somebody's playing out of nowhere, you know, you've got this melody. All these great songwriters from the 30s, the Gershwins, you know, you name it, Hoagie Carmichael, Johnny Mercer, jump in with one, you know, and what they wrote these great melodies. And they were easy on the ears and easy, but the melodies in bebop became were a reflection, I think, of that whole mid-40s, the war years, or people being killed in bombs, and everything was speeded up, and technology had made huge advances. I mean, gee, you know, all the airplanes when I was 8, 9 years old were covered in fabric, you know, and I'm talking maybe 1938, 39, and then by 1949, you know, you got, what did you have, jets by then? I think so. Can't remember, but they were all pretty good looking, made out of aluminum. But yeah, so the older side swing era guys would play easier sounding licks. I can't put it in any way. You know what
Shall
I
we
mean?
play it with you?
I don't know how long I can go on playing at it. Yeah. But they also, the tenor players. I just relate to the tenor players mostly. There was a predominantly a macho feel to the tenor. It was supposed to be you know, it was all tied up with sex and women, basically, like everything is for guys, you know. And so you wanted to. There was a style of growling into the tenor, sort of it's the same thing carried over, a gratuitous kind of anger. That he's not angry at anything, but he sounds angry, you know. And so you might play. in the audience in mid-40s would be going, yeah, yeah, man, stand in front of the bandstand and just have a great time. And the tenor player would go crazy. And sometimes he'd take his jacket off while he was playing. Dance around. And so, you know, there's not a lot of musical artfulness to a lot of that stuff. Now, that's what I kind of feeling I got from Charlie Ventura. Just stir the folks up, you know. And Lester Young came along, and here's another aspect about, even about the Aerosoul stuff. If you haven't used them or you don't know what they're like, it's pretty easy to dismiss. And if you, all you've heard is these tenor players that are playing, you know, and romantic, robust sounding things, heavy vibrato. And then Lester Young comes on, so Lester's playing and all of a sudden, that's like, nobody's heard that before. Wow, that's so light. There's no aggression. And I didn't get to bebop yet, did I? No. But that was the thing that became attractive. I think that was the real birth of the cool. No vibrato. The vibrato kind of disappeared, which was interesting. It was a mechanical vibrato, and my attention was called to that by a number of the younger guys that were a few years older than I and playing more modern music. And they said, yeah, Charlie Parker, wonderful player, but you know, he's stuck with that mechanical vibrato. And I thought, this is heresy. Somebody said something bad about Charlie Parker. I used to listen to the records, and when his reed would squeak, I would say, that's a great reed squeak. It's just at the right time, too, you know? So I was smitten, to say the least. Anytime I have a new idol came up, I'd be smitten. And then I got smitten by Charlie Parker. But those melodies, nice, easy, rolling on, you dance to them, you know, I love them, dear. And it's like, and then Bird comes along, and Bird is playing and so on and so forth. Now, the people who were grown-ups from the swing era, friends of my dad's, for instance, and stuff. What is that? What are they doing? Where's the melody? Well, the melody's moving along. It's a melody, but it's moving along at a terrific clip. And to me, it became very exciting. And when you're young like that, you know, the impact that it has on you is just an amazing thing. So that's one of the biggest differences: this fast-moving melody and display of technical prowess. I don't know. Can anybody jump in and add to anything? Or
more color notes in the melody.
Sure.
Like you mentioned, the flat.
Yeah.
They were using different. They would use notes of the harmony that the swing era players wouldn't necessarily go to. So there was just, I guess, more embellishment overall. And like you say, the melody was more complex. And it was kind of a long strings of notes,
That's
longer
right,
phrases.
yeah.
And you can notice a really big difference between swing era trumpet players and bebop.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Swing era trumpet players, the ideal was Harry James, and you know, the big sound and the big vibrato and everything.
Right.
And those guys were great players. And then the bebop trumpet players, Dizzy, you know, great technical facility. They weren't concerned. They had great sounds too in their own way.
Their sounds were not considered great by those same guys that liked Harry James.
No, Yeah, that's true.
Red Wolf used to talk about how Dizzy Gillespie had everything but a tone.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing.
I don't know if I agree with that.
I don't agree
I
with
don't
it at
either,
all,
no.
but I'm not gonna argue with Red Wolf.
Uh,
Who the hell's Red Wolf?
Dave, could you
Great
comment
swing
on,
player.
you know, there's so much theory available, and I'm gonna lay it on the computer and the books and the tapes and everything. Whole tone scales, pentatonic scales, Spanish scales, diminished scales, half diminished scales. How did you deal with all that information? Did you just start?
I drank a lot.
Well, that answers the question.
No,
But
yeah,
I mean, you start picking your stuff, or, I mean, there's no, it just seems like a mountain of
It
material.
is a mountain of material. A lot of it is too much for me to absorb, frankly, you know.
Well, I think Bird had a famous quote that was something to the effect of, you learn all your scales and you learn all your chords, and then you just forget all that stuff and play. So you have to absorb that stuff and kind of have it in your back
It's
pocket.
gonna
You're
affect-
not
yeah.
thinking about that when you're improvising necessarily. That's the kind of the homework that you did beforehand, so that you can have the fluency.
And the people that did absorb some of the odd scales and were interested in, let's say, polytonality and playing two keys at the same time, they absorbed that, and it reflected in their playing. But the whole game, to me, is working towards the point where you can play how you feel, and you hopefully you're trying to hear something and trying to bring it out through the horn, and then the technique has really got to get into the back seat. Once the technique starts coming to the fore, you better go, you know, take a break.
It's a long process.
Huge.
It's not something that just
Now, these
happens.
guys
It
teach.
never stops, really.
You know, I mean, Dave's generation were the first generations of guys that said, let's transcribe this down on paper and let's see what it looks like. You know, and then I'm sure there were guys around New York like, oh man, I got this transcription of blah, blah, blah that somebody did. Or
Yes.
they weren't published back then, right?
No,
I mean,
they
were
weren't.
just kind of.
They were always transcribers. I
Yeah.
did receive, when I was about 16, I received a copy of Coleman Hawkins' solo on Body and Soul, so they transcribed in ink beautifully. You know?
Yeah.
The calligraphy was pretty good. There was no finale or no computer thing, and so the guys that wanted to get the music played had a great hand, and some of that old music looked marvelous, you know.
Hey, Dave, the language of bebop and the instrument, your instrument, saxophone, is there a different connection, or is it just the instrument and the language are interchangeable?
They're interchangeable,
Okay.
yeah. Bud Powell is one of my favorite musicians. Bud was a master bebop piano player. He could really, boy, he loved playing those fast tempos like Bird did too. He wasn't just a fast player. Nobody played back home in Indiana faster than Bud Powell, jeez. But Bud would play Stella by Starlight and play the most beautiful, to me, the most beautiful ballad playing. And he had a strange technique that I observed him do by listening, mind you, but he'd play a complex chord and lift some of his fingers so that only maybe 3 or 4 of the notes would be held from the initial chord. It was beautiful sounding. So there's some deep things going on with those great musicians. Great musicians of any era are very deep people, and Bud Powell, he could just blow you away with speed and quick thinking, and yet he could play a ballad and just make you want to cry, you know. Monk does the same thing. I think just the gigolo always gets to me, man, you know. And he's doing some stride. You know, where's that hard to listen to Thelonious Monk? It's not here, you know. Yeah.
Dave, how were critics back then when things were changing? How did the public take it? You know, when stuff was going on up at, what's the club those guys played at?
Mittens?
Mittens, you know. I mean, you were there, right, when that was starting to change?
That's right, yeah.
You know, Monk started out as in Coleman
Yes,
Hawkins' band. He
yes,
was really
right,
kind of
right. I don't know how
a trad swing guy in a way, if you want to call him that.
It's going to
you
be
know.
like anything new. It probably was like anything new.
I mean, were people hating it?
Yeah.
People writing about it and saying, this is horrible.
People always seems to hate anything that's new or different that comes along.
Right.
And that doesn't just go for musical things. I mean, it happens with people with, gee whiz, why do you join that club? Because everybody wears the same hat, you know? I like that. And you want to try to, there's a natural sense, I'm expounding on this, something that I am absolutely zero expert on, but I have feelings about it. And I may be correct or incorrect, but the way I feel is that human beings do like to band together in a situation where they're all comfortable. I mentioned that before. They do it in music. They do it in the visual arts, where you have the, groups of painters form a school, the blues school, or cubism, and then they feel, they feel that they boast of their own self-esteem by hanging with other cubists and stuff, and the hell with everybody else. It's like Mel Brooks said about the first national anthem was, to hell with everybody else except the people in Cave 79. and that's a very kind of a human thing. I seem to observe it all the time. And so it goes the same with the new music. When I remember I knew some trumpet players who were in their 30s, and they were friends of my dad's, and they just couldn't stand Miles Davis. Jeez. And it was the Harry James comparison. It's a terrible tone, guys, there's no tone there at all. And Ornette Coleman came along. Ornette caused a huge furor amongst, when Miles came to Minneapolis and played at the Guthrie in the 60s, there were people in the lobby on an intermission who were saying, why doesn't he play,
My Funny Valentine.
Some tune that was big when Miles was playing.
My Funny Valentine.
Yeah.
Yeah, or da 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 da.
When lights are low.
Lights are low, and they all why is he doing that? Why is he not playing those? They're great. That's the music he should be. Guy made a change. He got bored. He bored himself to tears and changed. And to me, one of the lucky ones, one who could make a change. It's hard to make a change. I started to dwell on something like that to begin with, and there's more to talk about in that direction. It's tough to get rid of. You don't. And isn't that what the guy that Tom Cruise goes to, the Scientology? Aren't they supposed to clear you or something?
Oh, that's it.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to clear anything out of your mind in music, because you just want to drift back. See how easy it was for me to go and play some of that aggressive tenor, because I used to walk the bar there when I first broke in and everything, and it was the way you played, and everybody liked it. Well, I'm starting to fade on this, unless somebody's got anything else to say. And
were there times when you were playing and say you get on the gig someplace and things start going a way that you just are having fun with what you're doing, and then the other guys in the band are saying, what the hell's happening now? What's going on now? And you thought, are they catching this or not catching this, or is this going to break down?
I have seen that happen, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it's tough. It makes for a very long evening. It makes you want to put the horn in the case and see you guys later. But it's rare, because you guard against that happening. I remember one guy came to a job. We played a job. He slammed the trumpet case down, took his coat off, and started saying, "Damn it, says something. I have to be here." Oh boy, this is going to be a lot of fun tonight. Yeah, if that's what you're talking about, yeah, it happens. But band leaders, you open up a funny thing. Band leaders a lot of them are hated, it seems, because they're control freaks. They're the ones that call the tunes, set the tempos, tell you what to wear, and etc. And then there are guys like us who we're all experienced as sidemen, but we've been led little groups, or maybe big groups, I don't know, but mostly, every now and then I'll have a little group. And so I don't think I would make a good big band leader at all, because it would be like, what you do, the hated ones do something like, say, pull out number 627, Muscat Ramble, and any of those of you who don't feel like playing it can get the hell off the stand. And those guys are like, oh my goodness, they get a bad rep. But That's those bad leaders. But then there's the nice band leader.
Woody
I'm
Herman.
starting to
Woody
do
Herman.
theater now.
Everyone loved Woody
Yeah,
Herman.
everyone loved Woody, yeah.
All the sidemen loved him.
And there were other band leaders that say, can you pull out 676 guys? It's Muscat. I know you hate the tune, but you know, there's a lot of people here that love Muscat Ramble. It's their favorites, and they're paying the bucks. And I think we should play it, but I know if you hate it, I mean, you know, we don't have to play it. I'll tell you what, let's not play it. Let's get up 345 skirts.
Skirts.
That is a tune, actually.
Well, of course.
I should have
You
said,
won't hear it on Woody's band, though.
yes.
If you, because I know we have some students of jazz and stuff in here and who are interested in bebop, and if you were going to tell somebody how to spend 20, 30 minutes a day working on developing a better bebop sense, what would you have to do?
Well, gee, I think you got to immerse yourself in the music. That's what I did. You know, to great length, you got to listen to a lot of it, and then you absorb the feeling of it. You absorb the linear aspects of it. You absorb the tunes that are being played. And you try to play them. You learn them, and it's a matter of what it's like. You want to learn French. If you're lucky enough to have the money, go live in Paris for a while. You know, and then you learn French. Maybe I wouldn't, but you know what I'm saying. You got to immerse yourself, right, guys? And if that's what's going to happen.
I mean,
If it's attractive to you.
If
I mean,
it's
I think
attractive.
the reason we all got into this is because something about it really attracted us, and we thought, that's so interesting, that's so fascinating, I want to hear that again and again. And I can remember finding this record in high school that I just wanted to come back and listen to every day, and you know, pretty soon you get to be able to sing this, you can sing the solos, and when you get to that point, you kind of know them. You don't necessarily have to write them down, but you've added them to your mental vocabulary somehow, that then you might next try to learn how to play them on whatever your instrument is.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I don't know if anyone sits right down saying, I'm going to learn bebop, I'm going to start today, and I'm going to learn this solo, and I'm going to start now.
No.
And no, it's more like something attracted you about it to the point where you wanted to
Those
listen
are
to
the same
it.
guys, though, that say, after a couple of months, well, I've learned it all now. I'm going to move on to something else.
I'm going to get a gig. But yeah, because it attracted you and you wanted to hear it, you absorbed it. And I think that's how it happens, kind of in a natural way like that. And then once you've absorbed it, then there's kind of a natural tendency, I think, to try and imitate the thing that you've absorbed because you like it.
And you probably spend your first 10 years buying records and CDs and downloads.
That's
And,
very heavy listening.
I mean, there's a reason that me and Phil each have 3,000 pieces of vinyl. It's not because we like to move them every time we move it. You know, I mean, I could tell you everything about every record I own. You know, that's just how my brain works. And there's a reason I bought it, and then I have like maybe, I won't lie, I probably have like 30 records or discs where I'm like, yeah, I didn't like that. I just put that over there. Yeah.
Would you recommend for a student, Charlie Parker's Omnibook? Is that a good
course.
place to start, other than just listening to it?
And the Omnibook's extremely overwhelming when you look at it and you open it up and you're like, oh my God, there's more black on this paper than white, But it's just listen to it, find those recordings. There's a reason that they're listed at the bottom of each chart.
That's the deal. It's an oral art form, so it should all be done without having to rely on reading any notes. Really.
The Omnibook
Is that old-fashioned? Maybe it is. I don't know.
Well, no, the Omnibook is more of a guide. I mean, if you try to play it note for note for note, it's not going to work. I mean, it might work, but it's just a guide. It's just Charlie Parker on one day in his life. And if you compare Bird Gets a Worm to like when he played it 2 months later, I guarantee you it's completely different. And it's rhythmic. That's the one great thing about the Omnibook, to actually look at those rhythms. We haven't really talked about the rhythm of bebop up here. We've just talked about the harmonic vocabulary.
Tell me something about it, yeah.
Tell me something about it. I mean, the rhythm of it is so complicated, and they were trying to bend and twist and, like fool each other, and I mean, that was the whole thing.
And they talk about playing over the bar line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of it,
That's an aspect I didn't think of. The they didn't do that.
They still played in 3. They like that still. They were still writing tunes in 6/8, and
one of the big differences between swing music and bebop is that swing music, like the Tin Pan Alley music that they were playing, was very symmetrical. It was all 4-bar phrases. It was very easy to feel, you know, it was danceable. But bebop was very asymmetrical. They'd have 5-bar phrases and 7-bar phrases and, you know, 3.5-bar phrases, things like that. That's one reason the drumming changed the way it did, you know, because you have to phrase, you have to let the punishment fit the crime, is what Art Blakey said. And it's much harder to feel things that don't fall in a regular way like that. And I think that was one of the biggest changes. I mean, swing guys played pretty fast.
Yeah.
Still, not as fast as Bud
Yeah,
Callender,
sure.
but they were
Right,
fast.
right. They played fast.
And some of them played, like Coleman Hawkins, they played extensions and stuff, right? So to me, it was the rhythm of it that was the biggest change. And drummers really had to change how they played.
Drummers became very different
Yeah.
about drummers from
The
Yeah,
whole
instead of
sound
the
was
bass drum
different.
going, you know, 4
Right.
beats, it was like accents, right?
Right, and they
Dropping
played
bombs.
phrases between the snare drum and the bass drum, because they wanted the drums to start being more conversational and melodic, you know. It was, I think, partly kind of a social thing. You know,
Sure,
the
yeah.
equality, you know, and I think that's been a tendency in the music, you know, this asymmetrical thing, and then the rhythm section, bass and drums, getting more conversational and more like counterpoint rather than accompaniment.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or just straight timekeeping.
yeah.
And the bop guys were
Simple.
playing a bunch of Afro-Cuban music too.
Yeah,
I mean that
that's
was
right, that's
the
right.
Mambo Kings thing was happening while their music was happening at the same time, and they were getting into different levels of world music. And that was the first time I think maybe that had happened in jazz,
You're right.
Especially
or on that level.
Well,
you
on
know.
that level, but Jelly Roll Morton, even in
Finally, these guys are
1917,
starting to lay it out.
Jelly Roll Morton in 1917 said, without the Spanish tinge, it ain't
Right.
really jazz. And he said, that Latin music was important, but
But
all
no
they
one
had
cares
then
about
was
him
the
anymore.
tango was the first kind of pan-Latin. You know, every region in Central and South America has its own rhythm. You know, it's a national kind of thing. And the tango was the first one to become a Latin, truly Latin music. But when it hit Havana, they changed it, and they call it habanera, which was just Havana style. And from then on, everybody said, what are the Cubans going to do with this stuff? And then when the Cuban influx came into America more in the late 30s and 40s, all of a sudden it became a huge part of jazz. It had always been a part of it, no doubt. But Adam's right. You must have heard that, Dave.
Sure. Yeah.
Roseland Ballroom, right? Didn't they?
They did, yeah.
And I think those jazz musicians were the only musicians that maybe were able to, like Dave said, you had to be quick about taking this information in, the rules of a musical
Jazz
language.
musicians did populate a lot of the Latin bands
Yeah.
in Midtown, yeah.
It's a real crossover, right? And the Latin guys were playing jazz tunes
Sure.
too, right?
I think the jazz musicians, the beboppers, were just so happy to see all the variety of rhythm going on that they could play with, yeah. There was a guy named Tito Rodriguez that had a band who really did hire all Red Rodney and those guys, you know, and
Bird played with Chico O'Farrell, right? And Machito and
Machito, yeah, and Flip Phillips did too, yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a lot going on, you know, I mean, everything was changing so fast. The art guys, you know, Pollock and
Yeah,
de Kooning, those guys were a clique at a bar. They loved jazz music. I mean, it influenced what they were doing.
Yeah.
And people hated them at that time, you know. People were like, you suck. This is awful. You know.
now they can't afford to hang them on the wall.
I know. So, you know, I think the boppers knew too that you know, we're going to do this no matter what. I don't care what the critics say. I don't care what the swing guys say. And after you heard them play, it couldn't be. You couldn't deny it. You know that it was great. You know, you couldn't sit there and be like, "Well, this sucks." You know.
Is there a geographical place for where bebop developed? Did you grew up in New York, Dave?
Yes, yeah.
Is it you'd say New York or
I'd say New York
I would say
City.
New York, yeah.
Although Bird himself was from Kansas City.
right?
It wasn't, when he hit New York, then he really started to come into his
They had to
own.
gravitate to New York, yeah.
But a lot of those guys came from other places
Sure.
too, right? Dizzy was from South Carolina,
Where was Kenny Clark from?
Pittsburgh.
You know, it was a core group of people that did it basically at that club. You know,
Mhm.
and then there were all the young guys around them. You
The
know,
West Coast music too remained different from the
Of
East
course.
Coast music.
always, even to this day.
Why do you think that was, Dave? What was
There
that?
were no flowered shirts in New York. It's like, well, the beach was You had to go an hour and a half to get to Rockaway.
Right.
Well, also Los Angeles had the film industry and a great part of the recording industry too, and so
Yeah.
there was a great deal of value placed on people who could read really well and who had great technique and could just come in and knock something
Oh,
off
yeah,
very
right.
easily. So I think, and not to put down West Coast jazz, because there's some great players have come out of the West Coast, but a lot of times you hear maybe people have accused it of being a little more slick because it's, you know, because of just the musical expertise that was required for the studio musicians out there. And a lot of the great jazz players also played in the studios
It's a good
on the West
observation.
Coast
Yeah,
too, so.
yeah, I like
But
that.
Rumsey's Lighthouse, I mean, that was a stable of bebop music on the West
Oh, yeah.
Coast.
They were,
You know, Sonny Clark and.
But
I mean,
Sonny Clark said he had to leave. He
Right.
Said he just had to get back east.
Right.
More fire in the music.
Right.
they were listening to what was going on in New York though, and they were trying to absorb it, and it kind of came out in its own little dialect.
Well, and a lot of those guys were New Yorkers, right? I mean, they moved out there. A lot of them came off of Kenton's band, didn't they?
A lot.
Settling
Yeah,
out.
A lot of the studio guys did, yeah, that's true.
Shelly Mann, right? Jerry Mulligan. There was a racial aspect to that too. It got kind of ugly later on from both sides. In the 60s, I remember as a kid, I grew up in Philadelphia, and all of a sudden, about 1965, we weren't friends anymore. It was very strange. And then, you know, to read later on what was going on, you know, with the older guys, the jazz musicians, you know, that there was a real racial aspect to that between the hard bop, you know, that this is black music now. It was gospel, it was blues, this is our music. And then the West Coast guys were, you know, I don't know why, I wasn't part of it, but we know how to read, you know, we're intellectual. And I don't even know if it was the musicians that thought that way. It seemed like it was more the writers and other people that tried to put a thing on it, you know, like there was a war going on. But the musicians always seemed like they got along.
You bet. Yeah. Well, you know what? 6 o'clock, straight up and down.
Let's eat.
Great part.